was an article in the New York Times and an article in The Economist about philosophers having jobs in tech. And, 10 years ago, this didn't happen that often. And now more and more of the big tech companies, financial services institutions, like large organizations using AI are bringing in people with alternative backgrounds, both to help work through questions of bias and also to help work through something called constitutions for how LLM systems work, which are big documents that guide some of the rules to try to embody some of these more thorny ethical questions into how the systems work. So it's not totally widespread, but it's becoming prominent enough that there are, major news articles on it. Yeah.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Uber's Safety Toolkit provides one-tap access to Uber's safety tools in the app during an active trip. Here's how it works. Simply tap on the blue shield on the map to open the Safety Toolkit and select a number of Uber safety features, like sharing your trip with your trusted contacts, accessing emergency assistance, and learning more in the Uber Safety Center. Safety looks different for everyone, which is why Uber makes it easy for riders to customize their safety experience. Safety Preferences is an easy and hassle-free way for riders to set and forget their safety features. In this one-stop in-app destination, riders can learn more about, easily set up, and customize Uber's existing safety features, scheduling them to turn on when they choose. Riders can customize multiple safety features: audio recording, share my trip, PIN verification, and ride check, and schedule these safety tools to be activated at a specific time of day or when coming or going to certain destinations. Visit the safety page on Uber Canada's website for more information. Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. On this week's episode, we dive into what happened with OpenAI and Hugging Face and why it was a wake-up call. We also chat about how AI is changing everything from hiring people to getting mortgages, why discrimination happens along the way, and how we can do better.
Plus, Amber and I discuss why Elon Musk can't stop yelling at journalists and the problem with getting health advice on TikTok. There's a lot to unpack this week, so let's get to the headlines.
Headlines.
As you may have heard, the $4.5 billion tech startup Hugging Face was recently hacked by an OpenAI autonomous agent that went rogue during testing, ignoring safeguards to prevent this kind of cyber attack and breaking through OpenAI's own testing sandbox to launch 17,000 attacks on Hugging Face over a very short time.
As was reported by the Wall Street Journal, the rogue AI was, and I'm quoting here, active on the internet for several days before anyone stopped them. And OpenAI is still trying to figure out what else it may have done in that time. Hugging Face's co-founder has subsequently revealed that they were eventually able to defend the attack by using a Chinese AI model without any conventional guardrails. And I think it's really important, Jeff, and we should know that those are exactly the kinds of models that many U.S. AI companies, including OpenAI, want to restrict.
Yeah, it's quite a thing to have to turn to for that. And as Hugging Face's co-founder also noted, this is a wake-up call for the AI industry, and we should absolutely expect to see more of this sort of thing, namely AI agents deciding to attack us without any human guidance directing them to do so in the future. So, science fiction is once again likely to become reality.
I have to say, every time I even say the name of the company Hugging Face, I feel like I'm living in some type of alternate universe that I sort of wish would end. Now, we should say that maybe better late than never, we are starting to see more action on the political side of the equation to try to protect against these kinds of attacks. And I say try, that word is doing a lot of work here, because it's hard to say if we'll be able to accomplish that when we see AI models simply ignoring the guardrails that have been put in place to protect us all. In any case, Anthropic's CEO has recently donated $1 million to the bipartisan super PAC Public First, which is focused on putting in place stronger safety regulations around artificial intelligence. As the Republican co founder of the super PAC's umbrella organization, Public First Action, to which Anthropic itself donated $20 million earlier this year, he noted that we've seen what happens when government fails to act on other emerging technologies. With AI, the stakes are enormous, and we can't afford to make the same missteps.
Absolutely, and it's not just the politicians who are pushing this issue. A couple weeks ago, Google DeepMind CEO called for a standards body with advanced technical knowledge to be created to test and oversee releases of new frontier AI models. Plus, NVIDIA just recently announced that it's formed the Open Secure AI Alliance with a coalition of industry partners that include Dell, Adobe, CrowdStrike, and others in response to the Hugging Face incident. So it seems that at least there's getting to be a bit more momentum of people who are, starting to take this seriously. And I hope we see the follow through sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And also, tellingly, Sam Altman has declared, and this is fairly self serving, and that's kind of his usual approach, that, and I'm quoting here, we are now like in the singularity. We're actually in the moment that we used to talk about at the lunch table in a very not serious way. I've been waiting for this my whole life, and I think it's going to be incredible, hugely positive, awesome for the world. By the way, I feel like my 17-year-old has a much better vocabulary than just that statement right there.
Oh my gosh, it's just so revealing. And some of these tech CEOs, I think they need to employ some constantly running AI agent to alert them to when they're saying something that sounds as out of touch with reality and normal everyday human concerns as that. Like, hey, we totally can't control this obviously very dangerous technology we've invented, and we are so excited about it. You're going to love it. It's just crazy. And in fact, in the podcast interview that your quote came from, Altman rails against companies who are calling for stronger guardrails for AI, saying that, quote, I also think some of the alternative visions painted by other companies are quite terrifying. I'm going to make sure that gets pushed against and is not what happens. And like that guy has any power to really do that or any desire to even do that. That's the problem. It's not just his ability. It's what do you really want to have happen, Sam? Because I don't think you're really thinking about the rest of us.
I don't think he's thinking about the rest of us at all. He is absolutely just thinking about the value of his company over and over again. And we should say some of the well founded skepticism about AI leading to a world of abundance, this is a common theme these days, is something we'll talk about later relative to Elon Musk's striking interview with The Economist, has been building up as seen in the public pushback against data centers and the like. But there are so many other knock on effects of AI that people are really also getting fed up with. So we see this backlash everywhere.
Absolutely. And one recent trend being the preponderance of AI generated medical advice that's been creeping into lots of social media platforms. And the British Medical Association has been just one of many groups alerting us to this, recently saying that, quote, platforms like TikTok must do more to stop the rise of dangerous fake medical advice. Otherwise, it is the public who could be paying the price with their health and perhaps even their lives. So it doesn't get too much more serious than that.
And we're seeing so much of that online these days. And it's really kind of gross to think that people are happy to share dangerous medical advice just to make a buck and really taking advantage of people. With the UK's National Health Service also sharing research that found 40% of the most popular health related TikToks included AI generated content, with the majority showing up on deep fake influencer accounts that pretended to be real doctors. And Jeff, just before we get into your comments about this and a story from Meta, I do want to say that we should also remember that TikTok is the number one platform for a younger generation of users, often in their teens, and this is what they're being fed.
Well, and we're going to see all of these strands tied together in our story after the next one too. But as usual, not to be outdone, serial fraudsters supporting Meta has just been the subject of an expose by the New York Times that uncovered hundreds of AI-generated doctors on Facebook and Instagram who were, I quote, making misleading health claims for a profit, end quote. And this is complete with fake diplomas on their AI-generated fake office walls, including one diploma that read as it comes from the University of Degree. So they're not even being very careful about what they put there. And it's just stunning that people are falling for this kind of thing. But it's, it's a danger we have to live with, that people are not maybe astute enough sometimes to recognize this fake stuff.
I feel like we should do an entire episode on AI and health and talk about the advantages and disadvantages, because this topic is massive.
Yeah, and I think Sam Altman had just came out recently saying that basically that ChatGPT's the one that's tuned for health recommendations. He says it's better than your doctor. Don't worry about it now. Again, the same guy who's just so cavalier about the other dangers is like, no, we're way better than your doctor. It's sure we got AI that'll tell your kids how to kill themselves, but trust our doctor.
Unbelievable. One Chinese company that makes AI medical videos on TikTok said that it puts out 1,200 AI videos each day, with each of them costing only $10 to make. So the potential for profit is considerable. And going back to the need for political intervention, the New York Times pointed out that ads like these would be illegal if broadcast on television in the United States. The same would be true in Canada. But social media has much more lenient rules, and really no rules at all, that are making regulation around this type of content just incredibly difficult to enforce.
Absolutely. And, again, I frankly find it incredible that people will take medical advice from social media. What are you thinking? The default thing is, don't take your medical advice from social media. What are you doing? This is not the place to take medical advice. It's ridiculous. It's like looking at the classifieds in the back of an old newspaper and being like, oh, I'm going to get this serum so I'll have big muscles and live forever or whatever. It's definitely part of humans mindlessly heading towards the idiocracy future that's becoming way too easy to imagine. And as another unfortunate AI-inspired example, although vaguely hilarious one, a history professor at a state university in Mississippi put a hidden prompt in his midterm essay question, incredibly using just the old white text on a white background trick to hide it from students, which is something you used to do on websites to stuff in like SEO terms and things like that. So that he could tell which students used AI to cheat because they would have copied the whole thing into the AI chatbot without noticing the text that they can't read, but the chatbot certainly can.
Oh my goodness. All right. Next up, just to continue with this theme about the time that we're in right now, the essay was on the Industrial Revolution, but the professor's hidden text gave the instruction to include random references to Madagascar, a country that has very little to do with the essay topic. Unfortunately, as the professor explains, and I'm quoting here, 32 of my 35 students between two classes failed a portion of their midterm because they all used AI to generate their entire response. Pretty clever, I have to say, and a little eye-opening as well.
It is awesome. Oh, he did a video that went pretty viral, I think, on TikTok about this. And he points out that the students who are so lazy and so uninterested in learning that they got AI to write their entire essay directly didn't even bother to proofread what AI spit out, which is something we talk about all the time, right? You use AI, you got to check the results. But no, that's too much for them. They just copy and pasted directly from the AI into their submission. And the professor demonstrates how they certainly didn't proofread it, because some of the sentences in their submissions included, quote, Madagascar, purple bicycle whispers to the ceiling, quote. And, other intelligent sentences like, and very relevant to the Industrial Revolution, like, Madagascar floats sideways through the afternoon, end quote. So that may be kind of funny, but it's gonna be a major problem for humanity's future if people are comfortable doing stuff like this. And I'm not even sure how we deal with it, given the scale on which it appears to be happening.
Well, maybe this is some good news. According to none other than Elon Musk, we won't have to deal with it at all. In a wide ranging interview with editor in chief of The Economist, Elon shared that he thinks AI will exceed human intelligence in 5 years, and that he thinks it's unlikely that humans will even be in control anymore in 10 years. And I'm thinking back, Jeff, before we go on, to a segment that you did on the other Mac, talking about the fact that almost all of his predictions have not come true. So just take that with a
Yeah,
bit of
yeah.
a
Where's that
warning.
full self-driving car, Elon? Anyway, there's so many revealing points in that interview, but one that Musk shares with his nemesis, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, and others, is that we're going to have such an abundance of everything we need that money simply won't matter in 10 years because we'll be able to get AI and robots to deal with anything. And I'll note that, and I covered this in a segment about trillionaires. Um, Musk and most of the other massively wealthy tech leaders, and frankly, a lot of the world's richest people, donate so little compared with what the wealthiest people in the world used to do historically. So the notion that they'll be fine with nobody paying for anything in the future and their massive wealth becoming just, kind of meaningless, that is just absolutely ludicrous to propose that those are the people who are going to lead us to that future.
It is true, but he says, and I'm quoting here just in case you haven't seen the interview, what do you want money for? You want money for goods and services, right? You want money for mostly food, housing, transport, entertainment. Well, if that is so abundant that the robots and AI are providing more goods and services than you, than any human could possibly consume, what do you need money for? Now, I'm pretty sure that Musk and the rest of the world's wealthiest people still want their money. So it's kind of ludicrous.
The people who fervently avoid being taxed at all costs to give back to the public won't care about their money. Sure, Elon. Okay. Anyway, where the interview starts to turn for the worst is when the Economist's editor-in-chief says, quote, "On the one hand, we started this conversation and you described to me this extraordinarily transformative, amazing, civilizational changing stuff that's happening in the next 10 years. And yet you're also, an ongoing participant in the worst kind of tribalism in the cesspit of social media," end quote. And let's just say Musk did not like this line of questioning.
He sure didn't. As another example, in response to a post on X quoting the Economist editor in chief, subsequently saying that it's irresponsible for someone who has 240 million followers to propagate things that are simply not true, which is a totally fair point. Musk responded with his usual tact and restraint that she is a traitor to the West, plain and simple. And the post went on and on. And Jeff, we just have about a minute left. I do want to say that I posted a bit about this interaction. I got hundreds of comments, and I don't think there was even one of them that made any sense, except that there's a lot of people on X who love Elon and believe that he can do no wrong.
Oh yeah, it's just absolutely nuts, and it's worth watching. The Economist is great. I subscribe to The Economist. They've been around for like 200 and some years. They're the oldest continually published magazine of their type. So give it a watch. Their videos are great. And coming up next, after the break, we're going to have the Vice President of AI Engineering at the Vector Institute, Kathryn Hume. And you're going to want to hear this conversation, so stick around.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Kathryn Hume is the Vice President of AI Engineering at Vector Institute, an organization that just launched a new tool called Unbias Plus. Kathryn joined Amber to discuss how this tool works and why bias in the AI systems we use every day poses a significant challenge. Here's their conversation.
AI Spotlight.
Kathryn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
We have known each other for a really long time, and I've always looked up to the work that you're doing. So before we talk about Vector Institute and bias in AI, for people who aren't familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a slightly unorthodox background in AI insofar as when I was studying back in university at Stanford in the United States, I'm an American who lives in Canada. I focused on history of science and philosophy and a lot of thinking about using computational techniques on language. So I didn't intend to go into the field per se, but it ended up being that the training that I had using algorithms to understand text and culture became unprecedentedly valuable in our world of AI. So I've been working in the field explicitly for about 10 years, always focused on how enterprises and startups are applying AI to build meaningful products and kind of sitting at the intersection between research and adoption, which is why it's great to now be leading the AI engineering team here at the Vector Institute.
I think a lot of people at this point in time are familiar with this idea of AI bias or bias in AI. And it's a question I frankly, when I'm keynoting, I get asked all the time, like, what about bias? Uh, if we just kind of unpack that a little bit, what should the average person know about any type of bias that does exist within artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's pretty nuanced, but I'll try to summarize it in a way that's condensed. So I think the key thing to start with is we often think about humans versus machines in a lot of the discourse, like economic discourse around AI, when in fact, these algorithms are trained on data that have the residue and traces of human actions and behavior. So if we humans have bias in our actions, hiring decisions, diagnostic decisions, ways in which we talk about ourselves and others on the internet, then the machines are going to pick up these traces of human biases and potentially amplify them or augment them in their algorithms. So we talk about two kinds of bias: representational bias and allocation bias in the field around like AI bias. Allocation bias would be algorithms making decisions that allocate important rights. Should you get a job? Should you get this treatment? Should you get credit to different people? And the risk there is that if the algorithm has bias, it might unfairly impact, let's say, a minority class. Representational bias is a little more nuanced. It's what we see when we go on the internet. So if you do a Google search for CEO, does a picture of a white male come up, or does a picture of, let's say, a more diverse class of potential CEOs come up, which then implicitly shapes our assumptions on should we aspire to these careers, et cetera.
I wanted to ask about the second example that you have in terms of reputational bias, because I think this is one that people come across often, especially with generative AI. I'm thinking recently I was generating a video, and it was during the time that the Blue Jays were in the World Series, and I was generating a video that featured people cheering on the Blue Jays at a game. And of course, we all have that experience where all of a sudden we notice that, okay, it's all white men in the stadium. For those of
Yeah.
us who live in Toronto, we know that that is absolutely not the case. When you go to a Blue Jays game, it's actually quite diverse. So, in that situation, is there any way that that can be improved to better represent what I would call the lived experience, which AI is so bad at?
Yeah, it's so there's choices that the developers and designers of the algorithms can make, and then there's choices even that we as users of AI can make. So if we go into the first one, which is more kind of on the training data, and then something that's shifted in generative AI systems is a paradigm called reinforcement learning with human feedback, which I'm happy to talk more about. So both how we're training the models in the first place, and then how we're using techniques to upgrade those models based on how people are interacting with them. That would be that human feedback loop. Both of them can, like the developers of them, can make explicit choices to balance the training set, to train their algorithms to, say, have a more diverse representation when they're looking to optimize it, or even to design those feedback loops so that if most of the time, let's say it's only one class of people that is giving the feedback, that might skew it towards a particular kind of response. This came out with one of the prior releases of ChatGPT, where it was accused of being sycophantic, which means if you put in like any thought, it would be like, oh, that's a great idea. Even if sometimes the thoughts or the prompts that the users were putting in were either, let's say, factually incorrect. Like it would be like 2 + 2 = 8, and it'd be like, perfect job. So we had to kind of pull that back and rework through those human feedback training techniques. And we have agency over how we do that. As a user, you can then think about the prompts. So if you just put in, show me like create a video of the average person at a baseball game, you might end up with a more biased, generic representation. But you could come in and say, with the criteria of having the diversity that you would want to see. So there's a bit of also, like, fortunately, some agency that the users can have to embed their own perspectives into what they generate.
And before we get into what you're doing now at Vector Institute, this type of bias can be extremely dangerous. In the first example that you mentioned, in terms of the decision making process, I know that your background includes working at a financial institution. You can
Yeah.
imagine when it comes to any type of bias within financial decision making about who's going to get a loan and who's not going to get a loan. Uh, could you kind of break that down a little bit? Because I think the reality is that this is extremely dangerous in the context of discrimination seeping into all of these systems.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And while working at financial institutions, we always had to be extremely careful in designing, let's say, a system that would help decide credit allocation to make sure we didn't inadvertently give less credit to certain populations than others, let's say. I always use an example that for me was a great revelation of this. Often when you're applying for a loan, you'll put in your job type. So, do you work in technology? Do you work in restaurants? Do you work in small business, et cetera? And even if you are designing an algorithm, let's say, where you want to explicitly look at someone's gender and remove that as a feature that could be included to predict loan or not loan. So we would say explicitly, we don't want this, let's remove this feature. Sometimes there's hidden correlations with other variables that don't seem to be affiliated with gender on the surface. So an example in financial institutions was, if you take your job code, do you work in tech? Do you work at a hairdresser? It can end up being a proxy indicator of a different class. So what we found was, I think it was for like spas and wellness centers, they tended to be more highly correlated with female business owners than men. So if we left in job code as a potential predictor of credit, we could have a proxy unintended bias leading to these outcomes against a different kind of class. So that's where it gets pretty hairy, because you can't just take a linear variable and explicitly try to control for it. So it requires, I think, interdisciplinary dialogue, not just the scientists that are building the algorithms, but somebody coming in with like more of a humanistic or social sciences background to push the barriers on how the scientists are going about quantifying a variable, but then like thinking about where that might go wrong from like a more social science perspective. Yeah.
Is that happening? I mean, at some of these big AI companies, do those people exist?
More and more. So there was recently, even in New York Times, there was an article in the New York Times and an article in The Economist about philosophers having jobs in tech. And, 10 years ago, this didn't happen that often. And now more and more of the big tech companies, financial services institutions, like large organizations using AI are bringing in people with alternative backgrounds, both to help work through questions of bias and also to help work through something called constitutions for how LLM systems work, which are big documents that guide some of the rules to try to embody some of these more thorny ethical questions into how the systems work. So it's not totally widespread, but it's becoming prominent enough that there are, major news articles on it. Yeah.
Just one more question before we talk about the Unbiased Plus tool from Vector Institute. I have to say that over the past few months, something very strange I think has happened among a broader population, which is not just the AI backlash that we see, but more specifically, I think you've probably seen it, where there are women who are rallying together in some smaller circles, but are saying, "Hey, we shouldn't use AI at all, and we should kind of pull away from it." That's a turn that I personally, as a woman who's covered tech for a long time, never even anticipated, because my feeling has always been that the last thing women should ever do is not be part of transformational change, because that never
Yeah.
serves us well.
Yeah.
What is your perspective on maybe how women can get involved and should care about what's happening in AI?
I kind of fall with you where it's, especially when it comes back to, again, representation and data sets and use of the algorithms, and use of the systems, the more we exercise our agency to influence the data and the use of the systems, the better there is that class represented for broader, fair, differentiated use in the future. So I I think it merits consideration around like what happens if you exclude yourself from that data set, and it's worthwhile to engage. I also am very hopeful with a lot of the new open source models coming online, our dialogues around sovereignty here in Canada, and then we're really passionate at Vector about pushing towards more efficient compute representations so that more communities, more researchers, more smaller organizations can have their own design agency over what LLM systems look like. That's kind of the future that we're interested in at Vector. And I think that then opens up the possibility to say, all right, how do we want to design this? Like what would our version of AI look like?
What exactly is the Vector Institute? Because I feel that it's an organization that every Canadian should be familiar with. So, how would you describe it to someone walking down the street who was totally unfamiliar with what you do at Vector?
Yeah, great question. So there are three national AI institutes in Canada. Vector is one of the three. There's also Mila associated with the University of Montreal and McGill, and then Amy up in Alberta, which is associated with the University of Alberta. Each of them was founded around one of the quote godfathers of AI. So very long-standing, very prominent researchers in the field. I think you said you recently interviewed Jeffrey Hinton, who was kind of one of the founders of the Vector Institute, with a goal to really capture and retain both the research and the economic value of artificial intelligence in the Canadian ecosystem. So Vector is the one associated with the University of Toronto, and we do a lot of things. We work with organizations of all types, big companies, startups, government agencies, nonprofits, to help them take as much advantage as possible of emerging AI capabilities in research.
Can you talk about this new tool that you launched that can help in terms of just guiding people through this process of removing some of the bias that does exist in our AI interactions?
Yeah, absolutely. So we recently launched a tool called Unbiased Plus. It's plus because it's the latest edition of a capability we've been working on for many years. So it's kind of, the latest and greatest version of it. It is intended to help not only machines remove bias, but even humans become more aware of potential bias in our own language, um, and help us rewrite things, reframe things in a way that might be a little bit more neutral. So, what you can do with the tool is take a paragraph, take a sentence, take a whole document, input it into the tool. It will run an algorithm through it to identify potentially biased and loaded language, show you what it's identified, explain why it classified it against a set of categories that we've encoded into the tool, and then regenerate that language for you as a human to choose in a way that's a little bit more neutral. So it's always very focused on the human as a user, as opposed to just, let's say, algorithmic bias. For me, what's interesting on it is it helps me become a little bit more critical about my own use of language, let's say.
So I wanted to mention that the timing for this is, I think, really interesting, especially in light of the fact that the federal government recently launched an AI plan for the country. And they did identify AI bias as a risk that we all face in this country. Is the
Yeah.
timing a coincidence?
Uh, I think the timing, it's a bit of a coincidence because we've been working on this prior to the release, but it was a happy coincidence that we were able to package it and release it to the public in the wake of the strategy. And we are actively working with the Canadian AI Safety Institute, which is mentioned in the federal strategy. It's a ICED, and ICED is I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but Science and Economic Development. Um, I, a Canadian focused institute on working on trustworthy AI and AI safety overall. Across these three institutes, Mila, Amy, and Vector, we collaborate through Casey to create more trustworthy systems. So it's something we've been working on for a long time, and we were really excited to see it mentioned explicitly as an area of focus in the strategy.
So it's an open source tool. So how do you anticipate people using it, getting access to it? What does that scenario look like?
Yeah, so we see two kinds of users. The one would be non-technical users who can just, open up their web browser, go to the tool, input their documents, get an output, similar to, let's say, a free version of GPT or Claude. We're never going to have a paid version. No plans to do that. So it'll always be free. You can use it without concern. And then the second version is we also have the code open source for developers and engineers, whereby if a user were to come in, or a company or a research organization, and say, okay, we're interested in working on bias, but we're not quite interested in the explicit categories that were encoded in the first version, they can take that representative code, modify it, retrain the models to make it kind of fit their individual purposes. And we're really interested. We're going to be hosting a couple of hackathons over the next couple of months with challenge questions to bring more researchers and developers into the fold to start basically a dialogue around how we can work together as a community to have different perspectives on what bias might mean and continue to work through these challenges.
When I was reading through the email I got, basically a press release about those different scenarios, and you have summarized them well. One of the places I thought where it could be especially interesting, and I think the average person could really relate to this, is within healthcare communications, because
Yeah.
healthcare feels to me like one of those, I'll call it an industry, but really, it's a sector that affects all of us and our lives and the lives of our families. But I think people understand the flaws within the system quite intimately. So, could you talk a little bit about that scenario?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that one. That's also one of my most, like, one of the scenarios I'm most excited about. So what we were thinking there is, we all go to the doctor at some point in our lives, and often there are patient notes. So you'll be meeting with your physician, you'll be meeting with some healthcare practitioner, and you probably have had this experience too. You're sitting in the treatment room, and they're taking notes on their computer about the case notes for the patient record. Um, Sometimes inadvertently, they might use language that could end up on a record that could lead to unfair insurance claims, treatment claims, et cetera, in the future. So we think it's a really practical tool for physicians, healthcare practitioners to take their notes, put it through Unbiased to scrub them of any potential language that could impact the patient's care protocol in the future, so that it's just a very clean record for future use. And then also, increasingly, we're seeing the development of, let's say, personalized healthcare agents. And there will be questions around how should they speak? Like, what's the right diction and style for a virtual care provider to engage with a patient? So as private or public providers work to develop these technologies, there'll be emerging questions around the persona, and then how they take the responses from patients and put those into the record in a way that protects their future care options.
From your perspective, when you look at healthcare across the country, and I mean it's so disjointed. Obviously, every province and territory has their own mandates and plans and resources. But do you see this as kind of low hanging fruit, for lack of a better word, in terms of where AI can make the biggest impact on the lives of Canadians?
A couple of areas in healthcare. So, one that we see is healthcare, just like financial services, is an industry where it's not like going onto Amazon, where the worst case scenario is that you're recommended a product you're not interested in, or dynamic pricing where your what's offered to you might be you might not get a good a deal as somebody else. Probably not on a hundreds of dollar basis, but more like a couple of dollar basis. Still ethical questions associated with that for sure, but not as drastic as the livelihood of a patient with either the wrong information or the wrong diagnosis. So in that field, there are a couple of things we're working on at Vector. There's an initiative called Vital that came out of Gemini that's also mentioned in the federal AI strategy, which is one to try to centralize hospital data to make it accessible for AI and healthcare research. Um, Naturally, having patient data just put into a central pool can be concerning both for patients and for hospitals. So we at Vector have created a module called Federated Learning for Health. Federated learning is a subfield of ML where you can learn patterns from data in a local environment and then only share something a little bit more general. Think about something like a doctors sharing notes. So they would never mention that Amber was
Mhm.
the person who had the particular, let's say, health condition that they're going to speak about. But if they were to go to a conference and share their learnings for potential treatment protocol, they can speak about it in the abstract so that they can share that general knowledge without revealing the private personal details. So that's the approach we've taken to help support federal health AI initiatives using techniques that protect privacy locally, but still allow for those kind of general learnings. So we're really excited to scale that. It's different in kind than unbiased. This is more focused on user privacy, but we think that it has huge implications for health research across Canada.
And just as you're explaining that, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And I am simultaneously reminded, maybe way back when I interviewed a while ago, interviewed you on a series we did called The AI Effect. I mean, this was, pre-pandemic. And
Yep.
I'm reminded of talking to a researcher at Sick Kids. And she said something to me that really stuck with me about healthcare, where she said that one of the current concerns she had is that people were so worried about their own privacy and so misinformed in some respects about the fact that their data could be anonymized or protected, that they were just opting out altogether. And she thought that could have a poor outcome in terms of trying to help people who are actually sick. Is that scenario something you worry about in this age of misinformation and disinformation?
Yeah, it goes back to the question of women opting out of using AI altogether, where the inadvertent risks of that is that by excluding ourselves from the system, our 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 data isn't represented and therefore is not amenable for the potential benefits. So again, this is all complex and non-trivial. It's not easy to say, yeah, just use a differential privacy or federated learning module and everything will be fine. It takes real research and nuance to implement these techniques well. But the good thing is, when I speak about federated learning or differential privacy, these are security and privacy techniques that come with actual quantitative guarantees as to whether it's possible to reverse engineer if Amber was in the training set or if Kathryn was in the training set. So I would go on the line myself and feel confident that my data is protected from that mathematical perspective. So I think it comes back to education, like what you're doing right here, and having people from our field um, do more education to a broader audience on what these capabilities are, because it makes sense that people might fear that. And they're nuanced mathematical topics that are hard to understand concretely unless you've kind of worked with them. But I still always work from the belief that with the right effort and translation, like you can make a 5-year-old understand what this stuff means. Yeah.
I have one last question for you, and it's from a conversation we had very briefly the last time I did see you in Toronto at an event, and we were talking about kids and AI and how much exposure we should allow them to have. This is probably the second most popular question I get asked. So, what would your opinion be in terms of how much kids should get exposed to artificial intelligence, and as a parent, what's okay in that context?
Oh, yeah. It's a great question and very relevant for me, having kids myself and grappling with these questions. Um, I think it's a balance, and every family will approach it differently. There's copious research on not just AI, but more the clickbait engagement algorithms that drove the social media economy, having deleterious effects on adolescent self confidence, attention spans, happiness, well being. Like this is a well studied problem by now, and I think the emerging problem then with generative AI in K through 12 education and then in higher ed is it's easy to cheat. It's easy to look like you've learned when you really haven't learned much of anything. And so, educators are going through various options around, should we just remove digital capabilities from testing scenarios and assessment altogether and go back to pen and paper to validate that people have learned things? My personal thoughts on it are the experiences to develop agency and also to develop, because I started off in math. So I was trained to do proofs and trained to recognize what it means to really understand something at that deep logical level. That helps me use AI better. So I use GPT and Claude to help me read papers in machine learning and research all the time. But I think it helps me a lot because I know what it means to not understand something. So I can always continually push my knowledge. And I still think for kids, this is not necessarily K through 6, but like in middle school and high school, continuing to develop critical thinking skills and systems understanding at first principles through computer programming, through learning Latin. Like you can learn this in a lot of ways, depending on what the person is interested in, is going to be, is still going to be relevant, even in an age where there's increasing automation with AI.
Great answer. I think that's helpful to a lot of our listeners. And finally, just for people who want to try out the Unbiased Plus tool, where can they go? What should they do to get started?
Yeah, so if you come to if you put in Unbiased Vector Institute as a search on Google, it'll probably pop up. You'll find it there. You can also come to the Vector Institute website and scroll to the AI engineering page, and Unbiased is featured there for you to access easily as well. If there's engineers and coders listening, we really would love you to dig into the actual open source code, give us feedback, play with it, build something new. We're keen to see what else is possible on top of the interface besides the one that we built.
Awesome. Listen, thank you for spending so much time with me today, and it's great to chat with you again.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for interviewing.
Thanks, Kathryn and Amber. Coming up next, some highlights from our shows so far this summer.
Earlier in July, we spoke with former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci. Before we sign off from today's episode, we wanted to leave you with one of our favorite clips from that conversation.
So, I have a long relationship with the Prime Minister. We worked at Goldman Sachs together. When I was on the Romney economic team, I visited him at the Bank of England, and I was on the Trump economic team. I went to see him at the Bank of England back in 2016. And I had Prime Minister Carney on my podcast with Alastair Campbell before the election. So we did a pretty deep dive interview with him about what he wanted to do. And we could use a President Carney, to be honest. I'm a huge fan of the Prime Minister, and I want to see him be successful. And I want him to meet a comparable match here in America where we can rekindle that relationship. 2024 became a podcast campaign. And the president understood that. He went on every podcast. He was super aggressive about it.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night.
Vice President Harris elected not to do that. And I think it did cost her because she did have her, and her popularity was ramping, by the way. So I would just say he doesn't care anymore. So he has his Truth Social. He puts out blistering things. He puts out, I guess he had himself in a fighter plane, I don't know, taking a dump on a political adversary. I don't know. Does that make any sense? He was in a mankini with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the Gaza beach. We have 80,000 people that died in Gaza as a result of the war. He's got himself on the beach with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So he does not care.
I wanted to ask about a column that I just read that you wrote on America at 250 years old, saying, "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio?" Can you talk a little bit about America today and how you see the country potentially getting back on track?
Well, first off, thank you so much for bringing up that column. I was blown away at the reception of that column. I was really more of a, the Fortune guys asked me to write something. I was like, I'm going to write about Joe. Okay, so Joe DiMaggio was somebody that my uncles who served in the war looked up to. My dad was a little bit young, frankly, but my father's older brothers thought Joe DiMaggio was the man. He had such grace and elegance, but when you read his story, it's the classic immigrant story. And, his dad wanted him to be a fisherman out on the wharf in San Francisco, but nobody could hit a baseball or field center field better than Joe DiMaggio. And he had a break from his father. And this is just a metaphor about this country's immigrants, where they come in working class families, and now the kids are trying to ascend in the country and to find their way. And I wanted to write a story about that because, it's a story of my family. My dad was a crane operator, and he was like, all right, you're going to college and you're going to go this and you're going to do that and you're going to move up the ladder of success in America. And I think what's happening in the country now is the leadership has become apathetic to the plight of these people.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us here each week. We appreciate you being here in the summer. We know a lot of you are traveling and taking vacations, so we love to have the time with you. And just a reminder that if you've missed any episodes in July, we had a few great segments and conversations you should check out wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.